Welcome to 22 George Street. I'm your host, George. Today, let's start with the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine, a crisis that continues to claim countless lives and shatter any semblance of peace in the region. But it wasn't always destined to be this way. There was a moment, decades ago, when peace seemed within reach. In 2000, at the Camp David summit, U.S. President Bill Clinton, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat met to negotiate an end to the conflict. Barak offered the Palestinians significant territorial concessions and a framework for statehood. Yet Arafat rejected the deal outright, offering no alternative. Clinton later reflected bitterly, calling it the best deal the Palestinians were ever going to get. This refusal, rooted in a failure to compromise, solidified decades of bloodshed and despair. As we reflect on Palestine's missed opportunity, it's worth asking, how many other societies suffer from a cultural or political aversion to compromise? And where might this lead them? In today's episode, we'll shift our focus to a nation whose cultural DNA also struggles with the concept of compromise, China. Using political theory, history, and cultural analysis, we'll explore how this aversion shapes China's future, and why its destiny may lean toward collapse rather than reform. Politics, at its core, is about compromise. Societies are made up of diverse groups with competing interests and values, and politics provides a framework for balancing these tensions. In the West, compromise has been a cornerstone of political evolution. Take the United States, for example. Its constitution emerged from fierce debates between large and small states. The eventual solution, a bicameral legislature with proportional representation in the House and equal representation in the Senate, was a masterclass in compromise, laying the foundation for a stable federation. Political theorists like Robert Dahl emphasize that democracy thrives on compromise, where competing interest groups negotiate to find equilibrium. Similarly, Hobbes' social contract theory posits that humans agree to relinquish some freedoms in exchange for peace and order. In this framework, compromise isn't weakness, it's survival. But in China, the cultural and political narrative often rejects compromise as a betrayal of strength. Power is seen as absolute, zero-sum, and indivisible. This winner-takes-all mentality leaves little room for the incremental reforms or negotiated agreements that characterize political evolution in the West. Let's delve into history. In the late Qing dynasty, when reformist thinkers like Kang Youwei and Liang Qiqia proposed sweeping changes to modernize China, Empress Dowager Cixi chose suppression over dialogue. She crushed the 100 Days reform, fearing it would undermine her authority. Her decision wasn't irrational. She understood that, in China, losing power often meant personal ruin. This fear wasn't misplaced. After the Qing dynasty fell, the Republican government promised to honor agreements with the royal family. Yet Puyi, the last emperor, was eventually evicted from the Forbidden City, and the monarchy was left humiliated. This pattern of betrayal reinforced the ruling elite's belief that reform is a dangerous gamble. Better to hold on tightly than risk it all. Contrast this with Europe. In 1688, Britain's Glorious Revolution peacefully transferred power from James II to William of Orange, setting a precedent for constitutional monarchy. Germany's post-war social market reforms balanced economic efficiency with social equity, creating a robust and stable state. These successes stem from a cultural acceptance of compromise, something China lacks. China's reverence for strong leaders further entrenches this resistance to compromise. Figures like Qin Shi Huang and Emperor Wu of Han are lionized for their iron-fisted rule, while last emperors like Puyi are dismissed as failures. This cultural bias glorifies domination over dialogue, reinforcing the idea that power must be absolute to be legitimate. Consider the example of Mikhail Gorbachev. In the West, he's celebrated for steering the Soviet Union through peaceful dissolution. In China, however, he's seen as a cautionary tale of weak leader whose reforms led to collapse. This disdain for compromise traps Chinese leaders in a cycle of escalating control, leaving no space for negotiation or retreat. Reform is difficult under any circumstances, but China's path is particularly constrained by its historical and cultural context. During the late 20th century, the reform and opening policy succeeded because it aligned with global trends. the Cold War's end and a hunger for new markets created a perfect storm for China to integrate into the world economy. But today's international climate is starkly different. If China's door was once locked from the inside, now it's bolted shut from the outside. Domestically, the calculus has also shifted. In the 1980s, economic growth expanded the pie, allowing the government to distribute benefits widely. Today, wealth inequality and entrenched elites make this impossible. The costs of reform now outweigh the benefits, leaving repression as the safer option. Western systems derive resilience from flexibility, transparency, and trust. China's resilience, however, depends on its citizens' extraordinary tolerance for suffering. Early missionaries to China marveled at the population's stoicism, a trait that has enabled authoritarian regimes to persist despite massive hardships. Yet this endurance also prolongs stagnation, creating what some have called historical garbage time, periods where progress halts, but collapse has yet to occur. When systems break, societies often face a choice between rebirth and chaos. Western democracies have shown that shared values and pluralism can facilitate renewal. China, by contrast, lacks these cultural foundations. Without an Enlightenment-era movement to foster critical thinking and consensus, systemic reform seems out of reach. Even fragmentation offers no easy solutions. Regions like Shanghai might attempt modernization, but less developed areas could resist under the banner of national unity, attacking reformist leaders as traitors. This dynamic stymies progress and ensures that even bold efforts face insurmountable odds. China's path forward is fraught with tension. Strong men push policies to extremes, eroding the system's flexibility. Successors inherit this brittle framework, unable to innovate or retreat. As Manker Olson's logic of collective action suggests, systems that suppress diverse voices ultimately collapse under their own rigidity. In this light, China's future mirrors its past, cycles of suppression and revolt, with little room for compromise or renewal. Without the capacity for systemic reform, the country seems destined for periods of turmoil and stagnation. Thank you for listening to this episode of 22, George Street. If you found today's discussion insightful, share it with friends who value independent perspectives. Until next time, goodbye and take care.